Thanks very much, and good morning, everybody. And thanks for the invitation to be here today. Anytime I get invited to go to the West Coast from DC in February, I typically accept that invitation. It's great to be here with you today. We've got a great panel, and I think a timely conversation, too, because there's so much confusion, I think, amongst the general public about the issues that are affecting the recycling industry. I can tell you personally that I've worked for the trade association that represents the recycling industry for almost 10 years. My wife is a public servant in our county, and even in our household, we're not entirely sure what goes in the bin and what doesn't. So if our family can't figure it entirely out, I know that there's a lot of confusion broadly across the country. I wanted to talk just a little bit about the basics of recycling so that we're all on the same page, because it can be a little confusing. Starting with who actually is the recycler in the chain. And this is important because it goes to what are the solutions to the issues that our industry is facing currently. So there's lots of different parts of the chain, from households and businesses that are putting material into the bin, to the municipalities and waste haulers that are collecting that material, taking it to a MRF and processing it for sale either to brokers or scrap yards or consumers. There's the private sector scrap industry, which is, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, a very different business model than the municipal side of the business. If you think about end-of-life vehicles, for example, old cars and trucks, they're very hard to fit into that little blue bin, and yet they still get recycled. And that side of the industry, I think, is probably the least understood side of the business today. And then finally, manufacturers. Certainly, if the material never gets consumed for a new product, that recyclable commodity could arguably be said to not have been recycled. So you need a consumer who's going to consume it, but you need households and businesses that are going to generate it, and then you need companies in the middle that are going to process it. And without that, recycling doesn't actually take place. Now, the complicating factor with that is because there are so many different links in the chain, when there's an issue with our industry, that means that there's not just one solution that's going to be the silver bullet. If it was just households that were considered to be the recyclers, we could focus all our efforts on education and other measures. If it was just manufacturers who were considered to be the recyclers, then we could focus on design for recycling. We could focus just on recycled content and new manufactured products. But it's not. It's this whole chain, and so the solutions are multifaceted. Just quickly about that distinction between the municipal side of the business and the industrial side of the business. The industrial side of the business is actually much larger. Traditionally, the companies in the industry that ISRI represents are processing about 130 to 140 million metric tons of all recycled material, from scrap metal, paper, plastics, electronics, tire and rubber, you name it. The municipal side of the business, there's overlap because sometimes municipalities are going to sell their material to a scrapyard. But also municipalities can sell their material directly to a consumer. So there are distinct parts, and there are distinct business models as well, because if you look at residential recycling, for example, the MRFs that are taking in that residential recycling have to take in that material regardless of what is happening in the commodity markets. So when the prices of recycled commodities drop sharply, the flow of material that municipal or material recovery facilities have to handle doesn't stop. If you look at the private side of the industry, for example, if prices drop and a scrap recycling company doesn't have a buyer for that material, they don't have to take that load in. So that makes for very different market dynamics. Scrap recycling process, but I did want to go back just to that last one. There are different dynamics, certainly, and there are different business models. But I think it's also important to remember that the people that are in the industry, whether they're in the municipal side of it, the for-profit side of it, are there for a reason. And recycling is more than just an industry. It's also an ethos, because as society is becoming increasingly concerned about sustainable development, it's also increasingly important for us to recognize that recycling is part of the solution, not part of the problem to our environmental issues. And I think that's what brings a lot of people into the industry and keeps them there. So how does the scrap process work? I don't suppose we can actually start to queue up the video, the longer video, because I could tell you all about the life cycle of materials and how it gets recycled by a scrapyard. It might be easier just to show it to you on a video if we can load that up.
Recycling transforms an item that is no longer needed in its current form and processes it into a specification-grade commodity that is used in the manufacturing of a new product. This process requires a skilled workforce, technology and innovation, access to transportation infrastructure, and the ability for goods to move freely and responsibly across borders. For recycling to be successful, it relies on the basic economic principles of supply and demand, and this is true for all commodities: paper, plastics, metals, electronics, and rubber. The supply of recyclable material comes from two sources: industrial, 70%, and residential, 30%. But it is not just quantity that is important when it comes to the supply. The quality matters just as much. Manufacturers will only purchase the scrap if it meets quality requirements. The United States is known for the highest quality of recyclable commodities. The quality or composition of the material is based on ISRI standard specifications, which are based on the needs of manufacturers. These specifications for each of the major commodities are internationally accepted and used throughout the world to trade the various commodities. Scrap is traded much like other commodities such as soybeans, coffee, and milk. Most of the demand for the recyclable material produced in the U.S. is domestic and therefore consumed right here. Examples of how some of the scrap is used in the U.S. include U.S. steelmakers, who rely on ferrous scrap to make 2/3 of the steel produced each year. U.S. paper makers, nearly 77% of whom use some recovered paper to make everything from packaging, such as e-commerce boxes, towels, and tissues. The U.S. aluminum supply, 55% of which comes from soda cans, aluminum siding, and other forms of aluminum scrap. And the U.S. plastic lumber and fencing industry, which relies on nearly 100% recycled material, while manufacturers of other rigid plastic products such as drainage pipes report using from 25% to 100% recycled plastics. The remaining 30% is exported to more than 150 countries around the world for use in manufacturing. Recycled materials supply more than 40% of the global manufacturer's needs. A key element to improving both supply and demand is the concept of design for recycling, meaning that manufacturers design products, including packaging, with recycling in mind from the very start. This includes using recyclable material in the manufacturing process, making sure the products can be recycled safely and economically, and providing clear instructions to consumers on how and where to recycle each of the product's components, including the packaging. Consumers can help by making a conscious effort to purchase items with recycled content that can be recycled when they are done using it, and then properly recycling the material based on their local community's guidelines. Like any commodity-based system, the recycling industry has had to respond to changing conditions and market fluctuations. Time and time again, it has proven its resiliency and ability to adapt, and this legacy of innovation will continue long into the future.
Okay, and when that video talks about market fluctuations, it wasn't talking about the stock market this week. It was talking about other market fluctuations. And those have to do, in part, with what happens overseas. Because overall, about 70%, as the video said, of everything that we process domestically from the recycling industry gets consumed by domestic manufacturers, and about 30% gets shipped overseas traditionally. Unfortunately, China, our largest export market, imposed a number of restrictions, and I'm not going to go into all of those because we're short on time, and I do want to have time for a Q&A at the end. Suffice it to say, when China stops buying our recyclables, the prices for those recyclables plummet, and the incentive to recycle that material also decreases. So for example, if China stops buying mixed paper commodities from the United States, those prices actually turned negative. So for municipalities to process that material, they would have to do it at a loss. And so more of that material would typically go to landfill as a result. And I can talk more about that later. Just to sort of sum up, the scrap recycling industry in the United States is closely tied to manufacturing, because manufacturers both generate scrap and they consume it. And so we've certainly seen mixed indicators on manufacturing in the last several months. And that's a concern. Looking forward, China is going to continue to play an important role in the global scrap marketplace, both for good And I think most of the benefit has actually, or most of the impact has actually been positive, in that China has actually speeded up the need for scrap recyclers to produce a higher quality product. And that's going to be good for consumers and processors of recyclables across the chain. I would just close by saying, because you can all read, you know how to read the slide, but the last bullet point I think is the most important one, and that is recycling is a shared responsibility that requires collaboration across the private and public sectors. And if you could start to load up that second video, that would be great, because Brandi's going to give you an example, actually, of an actual scrap company that is doing the work, so that you can see how this actually works in real time. So thank you for your attention. I'm going to hand it over to Brandi now, if that's okay.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, and I'm going to hand this to you.
Recyclables are commodities, and they have a value, and they don't have to end up in landfills. And so one of our goals, our underlying principles as a business, is to make sure that we divert that material from landfills. People can bring it here, they can get a little money for it, or a lot of money, depending on the volume, and then it goes right back into the recycling loop. So we're happy to be here 25 years and continue to do that. Well, thank you, Robert. I want to thank you for the invite. It's amazing to be back here 4 years after I attended the SEER Symposium, and then probably 7, 8 years ago, or maybe 10 when Michael kicked it off. So as Robert mentioned, I'm a graduate. I went through the FEMBA program here, and while I was going through the program, I was very focused on transitioning into my family business. So I lived here about 14 years. I was last at the Walt Disney Company in the area of organizational development and leadership development. So I jokingly tell people I went from pixie dust to real dust. And I have not looked back. And so I've been in the business about 7 years. And as you mentioned, so I have a couple of metal recycling facilities based out of Houston called South Post Oak Recycling Center. And what we do is essentially we buy and sell scrap metal. And we function kind of as broker processors. And so essentially that would be middlemen or middlewomen. Joe mentioned that we're a part of the manufacturing supply chain. And we run a double commodity or double-sided model. So essentially, functioning as a broker processor, I collect scrap metal. And everybody always says, well, who do you collect that from? My audiences are varied, or my customer who I refer them to. If we're sitting in a business class, they would be my suppliers, but I reference them as my customers. I would say our households. So there are folks like you or me who are generating aluminum cans, wheels off of our homes, the HVAC unit that we're replacing. It then goes upstream where I'm then working with contractors. So this would be your certified electricians who have copper wire as a byproduct of their work, or HVAC technicians that are replacing HVAC units, air conditioning units, and then selling that in bulk. Continuing to move down my customer segmentation, then we get into what I call small specialty companies. So this could be your window frame replacers, your HVAC companies, so your gutter companies. So don't think that the people who are going to your house and replacing gutters are just being so kind and taking your gutters after they finish the job. They are coming to a place like mine to then sell it as scrap metal after the fact, because it's a commodity. And I would say, as a nature of our business model, we divert materials from landfills. So everything that's coming to us is being diverted from landfills. Moving further down that customer segmentation, then we deal with government entities. So I work with one of the counties in Houston. Believe it or not, toll booths, if you think of this, I hadn't been around here in a little while, but we had toll booths that were being replaced around a loop in Houston, and they were all made out of stainless steel. Guess who received those stainless steel toll booths? I did, and I'm very grateful for them. And then last up that chain would be, I would say, industrial accounts, so utility companies, telecommunication companies that are replacing anything from insulated copper wire to aluminum wire. Joe mentioned, and you saw that aluminum domestically represents about 55% of the aluminum scrap market there. That's a primary commodity for us that we work with. So that's a little bit of the business model, but back to the social piece here. And this actually was a short video. One of our values, and I was actually talking to Michael Crook about this morning, I'm a big believer in tying my personal values into my business. And one of those values is community. And for us, that means having an impact in the communities in which we do business. So we have 2 locations in the Houston area, both of which we partner with our city council representatives. We partner with schools in those areas. And for example, just over the holidays, we did a Christmas light drive. You're like, Christmas lights? Yes, absolutely. absolutely. Christmas lights, extension cords, those are all things that are recyclable materials that should not go to landfills, and they should actually be recycled. And so that's a way that we partner with the community directly, in a way that they think, oh, this is something that goes in the trash, and it actually does not go in the trash. So those are some things that we do kind of in that vein. Another thing in terms of, I think I would say the SEER model collectively is, I would say, job creation. So we work in an industry where we can pretty much hire a plethora of people. I would say about 50% of my workforce are what's considered now second chance hires. So these are people that have some type of record, some type of background that would be scanned out of the marketplace somewhere or another. And so we can hire those people, and we can hire them to service our customers. We can hire them to run our equipment safely. We can even hire them for office staff, and that works good because we can create jobs and family viability through that. But again, back to my personal values, I believe in leveraging those in our business. For me, it's beyond just hiring them. Then it's working on mindset. It's working on mindset. It's working on personal development. So built into our company business model, and it's mostly male dominated, as you would imagine, are daily affirmations that our employees do, because for me, that's about building a better person. Bringing in counselors or advisors to work on budgeting. So those are things that would fit, I would say, kind of tertiary within the model, but we look at the business more holistically than just buying and selling scrap metal. I say, if I'm going to be here, I'm going to have an impact on people. So that's a little bit about our model. I'll be open to questions, and so I'll turn it over to you, Asami.
Great, thank you so much. If you could cue up my presentation, that would be great. So a little bit about me. My name is Asami. I am a chemical engineer by training, and I started out my career in environmental consulting. I was doing work in air quality, noise, and odor, nothing to do with recycling. And then I ended up at a master's program at Columbia University in sustainability management, and then I caught the recycling bug. And so I am now at the Recycling Partnership managing projects mainly on the West Coast. And I work mainly with communities, but I'm going to talk a little bit beyond communities today because I think that may be more relevant for you. So what is the Recycling Partnership? We are a national nonprofit, 501c3, that aims to improve recycling in the US. A lot of the work that we do, again, is with communities. We are giving out grant funding to communities to buy trucks, to buy carts on the collection side, and then we're also giving money to do education programs for residents. And then technical advisors like me and my peers, we go in and help communities build their education programs. So these are some of the impacts we've made in the 5 years that we've been around. And then on the community side, and part of the reason why we focus on communities, it's sort of the last kind of defense for the circular economy to work. This is really the only reverse logistics mechanism that we have at scale in the US to get materials back into the system. And these are run by communities and local programs that have very limited funding. And so we believe that it's really important to give them the infrastructure they need and the resources they need to educate their residents to recycle correctly. And we can do this because of our funders. And like Joe mentioned, private-public partnership is really important. A lot of our funders are famous brands, retailers, trade associations. I think we still have EPA on there as well. But we provide a pretty competitive environment for these organizations to come together and really look at the entire recycling system and to try to come up with a solution. So Joe talked about some of the issues we are facing with recycling. We are really seeing issues on all parts of recycling, everything from down at the consumer level. The residents are confused, just like Joe said. I am constantly confused about what is recyclable, and I just moved to Portland, Oregon from New York City, so I'm still trying to figure out what is really recyclable in Portland as opposed to what was in New York City. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about issues on the processor side and the material recovery facilities, the MRFs. But even though there are issues, we see that really not as just challenges, but really opportunities for us to really improve the system. And what is great is there's been a big trend of communities, brands, states, cities, committing to making materials that are more reusable, recyclable, compostable, and then committing to use more post-consumer recycled content in their products. But just having that commitment is really not enough to fix the system. Right now, we are estimating that there's over $1 billion gap in PET supply, recycled PET supply, than what is really needed to really fulfill the commitments that a lot of the brands are making. One of the most famous commitment is the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's New Plastic Economy Global Commitment. Over 400 organizations worldwide have committed to this, and some of our funders are part of this as well. But right now, I think 6 billion pounds of PET is used in bottles, but we're still short in meeting the commitments that they're making. And some of the commitments are, they need to be making their products 100% recyclable, reusable, compostable, and then they also have some commitment that they're making individually as organizations on the amount of recycled content that they're going to have in their products. So the current funding level and the mechanisms are really insufficient to bring that material back into the system. But the drive that is being created by these commitments and also the focus right now in the media about plastics is really helping us try to fix this problem. So I want to talk about two issues that we are facing. And one of it is on the upstream side. And one of them is that the speed of packaging innovation has outpaced recycling innovation. So this is kind of a typical equipment you will see at a MRF. And this is a screen that separates paper from containers. But you can see a lot of things getting wrapped around in there. And with all these different packaging out there, the machines are not able to separate the materials correctly. Flat pouches look like paper. They act like paper on these machines, so they might end up in a paper pile. Small containers are falling through the cracks, and they're not getting captured. Traditional mechanical recycling system also involves, human sorters. There are other more advanced technology now with robotics and AI that is starting to come into the system, but there's still a lot that needs to be done so that materials are sorted properly on the technology side. But what can really help is for brands, for new companies thinking about products to really think about the implication of their design on what is happening downstream. I think there's a statistic that only 50% of plastic packaging out there in the US is being recycled. I think that's a US EPA number. And so there's a lot out there. And there's a lot of materials right now that don't have markets at the end, so processors are not willing to process them. And materials that traditionally were collected, but because of the market downturn, like Joe talked about, they're having issues moving that material, so they may be ending up in landfill. So, a material, it may be technically recyclable, but that's not really enough. You need to have a solid, sustainable collection system, a processing system, and an end market for that material to really move the system through the system. So we're really calling for anyone thinking of products or packaging to really keep that in mind. The other thing we talk about is, well, actually, no. That's all I wanted to talk about. So like I said, fate of materials largely determined at design. Demand alone, like the commitments, is not enough to just increase recycling. And like I said, people are already confused. We're at about 32% recycling rate right now in the US. And so, we don't want to make this problem any worse. So we really have to think about it in all different parts of the system. And just like how Joe closed it out, it really takes better coordination, collaboration, and oversight to improve the pathway to recyclability for materials and to create a sustainable system. And plastic, I kind of said bad things about plastics, but I'm a huge fan of plastics. So they really provide great environmental benefits as well. They are lightweight, they reduce emissions. Because of that, they are, they keep materials fresh. If you're talking about food waste, so that they have the capability to reduce food waste as well. So they're really important. So you really have to be able to think about all the pros and cons of, are you going for pure recyclability? Are you thinking about the lightweight aspect of it? And I think you through this program and through what we're talking about today, I think you'll have the tools to kind of think through the questions you need to make the right decisions to make a positive impact. So I think that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Asami.
And some of what I presented here is in a couple of our reports. So shameless plug here.
So thank you, Asami. So pulling it together, when we started and when we were talking about this with Robert, we started in a couple places. We said, we wanted to really hit on the point that recycling is bigger than the bin, and where does it go? What is the black hole that it goes to? And so it's bigger than the bin. Joe mentioned that 30% of recyclables goes to material recycling facilities, or MRFs. The other 70% actually goes down an industrial chain, which is kind of where I reside. And then from there, the question is, so what happens with that 70%? And I don't know if I made it clear enough, but that is the partnerships with mills and foundries that then melt that material down, whatever it is, and then make new material. So a true full cycle recycling loop. We like this. Actually, research shows that aluminum cans go from production to our shelves to our mouths and back on the shelves in about 60 to 90 days. So that's how fast aluminum, for example, is turning. So hopefully you got a little bit of insight, into recycling being bigger than the bin, the challenges that are beyond it, and where it goes.
Can I just jump in on that aluminum note? Keeping in mind what we're talking about today, I think it's also important to remember that producing primary aluminum from bauxite, from mining, and everything else is extremely energy intensive. So when you're producing aluminum from aluminum scrap or recycled aluminum, the energy savings are something of the order of 90% in terms of reduced energy and, by extension, reduced emissions. So that's something else to keep in mind that we haven't really talked about yet.
Great. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentations. A couple of years ago, I was at the client's facility, one of the largest recycling companies in the nation, and they were doing a tour. I will not forget that day for two reasons. One of them, it was a very educational day, and the second one, it was very, very smelly. And I've witnessed actual people, as you've mentioned briefly, actual people going through the sorting of this rubbish, and some of them were wearing gloves, others masks, while some of them, they were not wearing them. And so when I asked about safety of these employees, the risk management team advised me that they're hiring them through temp agencies. I think that was one of the ways for them to mitigate their risks. I didn't want to go that route, ask too many questions, because I wanted to keep the account. But in the recycling business, is there any standards that would encourage or force these employers to not only worry about the bottom line, but also the well-being of all of the workforce? Thank you.
If I can jump in just quickly, recycling really should be thought of as part of the manufacturing chain. And so recyclers are subject to the same OSHA and EPA requirements as other companies in the space. I think there has been room for improvement in terms of the safety record of the industry, and that's something that we're working on constantly. And I think it's one of the real success stories, actually, in terms of the improved safety record and the improved technology that is going to allow us. You talk about hand sorting, which does still happen, certainly at MRFs and other facilities, but that's becoming less and less the case. And I think as our technology investment continues to grow, you're going to see that trend continue.
Yeah, there are less people. Well, there was a trend of having less people on the sorting line, but because of what's happened with China and the focus on trying to reduce contamination, they are adding more and more people, staff, to try to pull out the things that can't go through the system. But the other thing I want to say is, it really is on the MRFs' minds, safety. When we surveyed MRFs in California, Oregon, and Washington, the top things they said, especially in California, were needles is really a huge problem, batteries, flammables, things that it can explode that can really affect the staff is a problem. And the other big problem is actually plastic bags. So when you saw in my little GIF there, things wrapped around, well, someone actually has to go into that system to try to cut it all out. And that is a very dangerous job. And so the MRFs are trying to reduce that risk by really paying attention to those contaminants.
Lastly, if I can speak to the industrial side, so we actually buy materials from MRFs. So I'll buy aluminum cans from MRFs. And the way that we're set up in many other metal recyclers is that material needs to be sorted before it comes in. So we don't take hazardous material, we don't take flammables. And so that alone kind of mitigates the risk or the exposure for our employees. We have a very robust PP&E program through ISRI, or our trade association. There's a group that's called Circle of Safety, which we're a part of. So we're staying on top of and apprised of what we need to do to make sure that our employees are kept in the best care.
And then just quickly, just as a practical matter, because labor markets are so tight today, recycling facilities don't really have much of a choice. If they want to hire and retain employees, they're going to have to create conditions that are better than subpar. Sorry, you've been waiting for a while for your question.
My name is Rosie, and I'm an executive MBA student, and I do a lot of nonprofit work with the environmental organizations like Surfrider, and I design fashion items, and I'm planning to launch my own line within a year using reusable materials. So my question is in two parts. One is about educating the younger generation about not just recycling, but a lot of people are not aware that even if you live 50 miles inland, whatever you put down on the ground ends up being in the ocean through urban runoff. And we did a lot of research, and this through gyros, the plastic never goes away. You're saying like it's lighter, but it's not biodegradable. It's photodegradable. It gets smaller, but it never goes away. And all these like islands of plastic are in the ocean that is just twice the size of Texas. It's horrendous. So my point is, one is about how to have the better ways of educating the younger generation, and the second way is for the plastic that's already there, finding ways to make them reusable. For example, Nike has these football jerseys that are made completely out of plastic saved from the ocean that they sell. Adidas made these running shoes completely saved from the plastics from the ocean that you can run marathons in, so they are functional as well. So maybe bringing that technology more into mainstream so we can actually make something with that, not just like they are, oh, icky, just get rid of them, but like actually bring them back, because there's the endless consumerism going on too. And combining this, the capitalism with altruism, and help the planet more.
I don't mind jumping in there, and I think Joe can add to it. Interestingly, so our trade association is partnering with an organization called Jason's Learning. And Jason's Learning is focused on building out STEM-based curriculum for educators, which encompasses several things, metal identification, the entire supply chain of recyclable materials. And so there is an effort right now to try to get curriculum and knowledge out, I think, to kids and to students at a very early age, so that they can become informed about the process and the entire supply chain.
Yeah, and I think certainly developing that K through 12 curriculum with Jason Learning is a great start. But the education has to be across the entire society, I think, right? To learn what they should be recycling and what they can't. And also educating manufacturers about using more recycled content. Because like I said at the beginning of the session, recycling is really part of the solution. Those plastics that are winding up in the ocean are there in part because they haven't been caught up in the recycling chain and or there aren't viable end recycling markets for those products. And so that's why I say that I think we're part of the solution. But thanks for your questions.
So we have one over here and then we're going next.
Okay, this is kind of a multi-part question, I guess. I don't know, two, I hope. Number one, is there any type of, I don't understand why when you move from one municipality to another that all the recycling rules change. Is there any type of overall arching federal regulation or federal movement to come together and create a unified standard? And number two, is there any way that we can get manufacturers to label their products? They're already putting these silly recyclable signs, which don't mean anything to us consumers, at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that don't seem to have any meaning anymore. Is there any way that we can encourage the accurate labeling of products so we know how to recycle them? And instead of commingling everything together, could that be a solution to that?
Yeah, I will say, let's see, where do I want to start? Your question about, kind of harmonizing a material list, it is very much needed. And it's really hard to try to get, communities or states to really just agree on one list. There's just so many different players in the recycling system, and they all have the power to kind of dictate, what they want. And part of it is because, recycling kind of got tacked on to solid waste services, and because those were managed by different municipalities, they all just kind of went on their own and set up the recycling system as they saw fit. But at the Recycling Partnership, we're doing a lot of harmonizing message work. We are working with the state of Ohio, state of Michigan, I think Minnesota as well, to try, and also northern Texas, to try to make sure everyone is saying the same things in terms of, let's say, don't put plastic bags in your recycling, or put a certain material in your recycling bin. Trying to harmonize that message so that at least there's kind of a uniform message going out to the communities. As for your question about labeling, yes, those resin identification codes are very confusing. They've actually changed it officially so that they don't have those chasing arrows. And when we ask residents about, why did you put this thing in your recycling bin? They're like, well, the chasing arrows were on it. Like, oh, no, that's not why you should be putting it in there. But there is a new label called How to Recycle label, and I wish I had an example, but you may start seeing them on your products. It is done by the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, and it gives you a little bit more information than traditional other label on what you're supposed to do. But there's still a label there that just says check with your local recycling program. So there's still a little bit you have to do to try to get to the right information.
Just to jump in on that one, regional market dynamics have an impact too. Transportation costs to move a recycled commodity to a consumer is a huge part of the equation. And if a local municipality doesn't have a consumer that's relatively close by that would take in their glass or plastics or other commodities, it makes it difficult for the municipality to include that commodity in what they accept in terms of collection. And then just on the labeling, it's another challenge for that is that bottles and cans and other containers tend to be relatively packed with labels already. And so it's difficult for some consumers to actually decipher if we were to put additional labeling on, which I think is the way we're headed.
Somebody had a question in the back there.
So I'm in consumer products, merchandise, and been working on a lot of film, TV, and gaming most recently. I was also a Disney alumni, so Marvel Hardlines. Yeah. So the question that I have is, as a brand manager, what are some things that we can be more cognizant about for recycling? And you mentioned a good point about packaging. what are some other examples that we can help in the product development process?
I'm going to take that.
You want to start or you want me to start?
You can start.
Yeah. So I think for the brands, it's two sides of the equation, right? It's making sure that the products that you're producing are recyclable at the end of their lives. And then on the manufacturing part of it, making sure that you're incorporating recycled content in the material that you're already producing. So it's one thing to claim that you're going to hit sustainability goals by 2030 and use 100% content, recycled content. It's another thing to actually put those programs and policies in places that are going to ensure that you're going to be able to obtain that material to meet the sustainability goals that you're looking to hit. Because a lot of major brands are all announcing major sustainability initiatives, and there's only so much recycled material to go around currently. And so that's something that I would caution to keep in mind.
Yeah, and I think brands can really take a role in educating. I mean, within the brand itself too, but to the consumers. You know, there's so much marketing out there, and you talk about your products really well, but there's an opportunity to educate as you are putting in recycling content or recycled content in your products, but and also making your products recyclable. You can use that as a platform to educate consumers.
I think we have time for 1 to 2 more.
There's one back here.
With the increase of online shopping, packing waste has also increased for household and businesses. What is the industry doing about cardboard, air pillows, bubble wraps, packing peanuts? Is there a secondary market for reuse of these materials since they're generally used just one time, but they are labeled as reusable? So how are we holding companies accountable for all the production of the packing material?
Yeah, e-commerce has really changed the materials that are out there. And then when a lot of the population is moving into apartment buildings, you are generating so many little cardboard boxes and those air pillow, and those plastic packaging that like Amazon likes to use. With cardboard, cardboard is recyclable. There's definitely a market. You can continue to recycle that. Just make sure you break down the box so you're not clogging up all the space. But with the plastic packaging and the air pillows, they are recyclable. We are actually working to make that chain a little bit more robust and sustainable. We're doing a project up in Seattle where we're trying to get people to use the retail drop-off boxes more. So you've probably seen at Target or Whole Foods or any other stores, bins that collect plastic bags. Those bins can also collect those shipping bags, the plastic ones, as well as the air pillows. And not many people are aware of that. So we're trying to make that a focus of our education program right now.
And I think we're just about out of time, if I'm not mistaken, but because there has been such an increased focus on the issues associated with recycling, it's certainly getting more attention from state and local legislators. You talked about holding producers to account. You're going to see increased initiatives legislatively, whether it's extended producer responsibility or other initiatives, to try to close that loop as well.
Yeah, and I'll be around. I think we'll all be around this afternoon. So if you have any questions.
Yes, I'm really sorry. I know that there's probably a million questions, but we're gonna call it here so that we can keep on schedule. We have lunch coming up. Are you going to be around for lunch?
Yep.
Okay, so you can swarm at your leisure. Our 3 speakers, and I realize I've been remiss by being down there. I haven't thanked everyone, but thank you so much, Joe, Brandi, great seeing you again. All right, Asami, thank you so much. All right, so we are at lunch. Network to your heart's delight.